Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, one more time. Good afternoon. Yes, thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Denise Pimentel. For those who may not know me, I am a 3L here at PACE. I work closely with Professor Atwell to create events that nurture diversity, equity, and inclusion, and am the creator of the first ever pipeline program within the university called PACE Connects. I want to first and foremost thank everyone so much for coming out to our first ever inaugural Equity and Justice Forum. I know I can speak on behalf of all the students here when I say we are very grateful to Ms. Sells for being here and for taking the time to be here and speak with us, and are very excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. The title of this forum today is called Belonging: Centuries of Struggle. And as a first generation student and a person of color, this event means so much to me because I cannot tell you the amount of times I've struggled with the idea of belonging in law school. It is something that we as students often talk about and connect over. But if there's something or anything that I am often reminded of, and that this event today specifically helps me remember, is that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I, along with all of us, belong here. And so as I was on my way over here, I read a quote on the board, which I please recommend you guys to please write your ideas on the board. It's right outside the tutor room. But on my way over here, I read a quote that read, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." And today, this event is doing exactly that. It is truly an honor, being that we just had Black History Month and are currently in Women's History Month, to be able to learn from and hear from these two successful Black women who continue to pave the way and fight for things that they really care about. Success is a journey, not a destination. And to me, the real power is in achieving success is in working together. So thank you for working with us to provide us with the tools that we need to be successful to be a successful leader in a sometimes unjust and unfair world. And speaking of leaders, it is my pleasure to introduce someone who continues to be a trailblazer, an example that we are truly the change we seek in this world. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to Dean Anderson. And also, don't forget to sign out to get PD credits.
Thank you, Denise. And I see you learned well from me in your call and response opening to your remarks. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Welcome to the inaugural Justice and Equity Forum at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. We here at Haub Law are deeply committed to advancing racial and social justice in our community and more broadly throughout the world. Anyone who has been watching this space has seen us expand our social justice curriculum, launch our Access to Justice project, open the Legal Hand Legal Information Call-In Center, and expand pipeline and pathways programs for local youth. And with Denise's help, also expanding pipeline opportunities for diverse PACE undergraduates as well. And all of this work is important work that we will continue, but there are times when it's important to have conversation and to use conversation as a way to reflect and evaluate and then effect further change. And that's what this forum is all about. We are honored to have as our guest Marcia Sells, the Chief Diversity Officer of the Metropolitan Opera, who will engage in a conversation with our own Professor Barbara Atwell. Following their conversation, there will be a Q&A session and a small reception. First, I'm going to bring up to the podium our newly appointed provost, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to congratulate him with your applause. Our newly appointed provost, Dr. Joseph Franco, who will come and share a few words with us.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's hard to believe this is my 36th year at PACE, but I am delighted to be in this role and to learn more about how I can support Haub Law and continue moving forward. Thank you, Dean Anderson, Haub Law faculty, students, staff, alumni, as well as a commitment to our student organizations at the law school who put the event together. Special appreciation to Professor Atwell for your commitment to DEI for so many years, I believe since 2009 and beyond. We are very grateful to you in your role as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. A warm welcome to Marcia Sells. I want to thank you on behalf of the university for taking time out of your schedule to join us for this critical conversation today. Our mission of Opportunitas is at the core of everything we do at Pace University and what we strive to be and become. Part of this mission is preparing our students at all levels to make positive contributions now and to the world of the future. You're doing that by being here. This inaugural Equity and Justice Seminar does that by creating an open dialogue about issues impacting diverse groups and how all of us here today can make a difference and affect change for those very individuals. PACE remains committed to being an inclusive and diverse community in all forms, becoming an anti-racist institution, and continually aims to serve the needs of historically excluded and underrepresented students, faculty, and staff. Through our work at the Gossen Center, thanks to our donor, university programming and addition of our anti-racist education curriculum requires 6 credits to be taken by our undergraduate students. So I'm very happy to hear that there's continuing to be a connection to the undergrad students. We strive to do better, can be better in our efforts to raise awareness and to be change makers through our DEI initiatives through our landscape of PACE. Our efforts are always collaborative, and as Jacqueline Woodson stated, quote, diversity is about all of us and about having to figure out how to walk through this world together, end quote. Woodson noted that the invisibility of Black people in literature and what it meant to be a Black writer in mostly a white world of children's books and beyond. She is one of many individuals who have been instrumental in changing that landscape, and we will continue to do so by the event today. I'm excited to be here. Can't wait to hear about your own projects and ideas as we grow and learn and move forward together. Thanks again for having me. Well, Dean Anderson, back up. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And now to introduce our speakers today, our distinguished guest, Marcia Sells, as well as Haub Law Professor Barbara Atwell. More than a year ago, Marcia Sells was named the Metropolitan Opera's first Chief Diversity Officer. She came to the Met from Harvard Law School, where as Dean of Students since 2015, she led her team in the creation and implementation of a wide range of diversity programs. Previously, she held numerous positions, key positions at places like Columbia University, the National Basketball Association, Reuters, and the Dance Theater of Harlem, where she first began her career as a dancer. Marcia is also a lawyer by training and has a law degree from Columbia, and used that law degree as an ADA for the Kings County District Attorney's Office. At the Met, Marcia is part of the senior management team and is responsible for developing new diversity initiatives and enhancing existing programs. The Met's Human Resources Department is under her direction. She has a broad mandate to work across the entire institution, from administrative staff to union employees to the Met Board of Directors. One of Marcia's first responsibilities was to put into place a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, which places these essential principles at the heart of the Met's hiring, artistic planning, and audience engagement initiatives. While overseeing the human resources team, she leads the task of identifying systemic and structural inequities across the company. She also works closely with the marketing and development teams to help broaden the base of the Met's audience and donors. Our moderator, Professor Barbara Atwell, hopefully familiar to all of you, joined the law school faculty in 1986 and has served as Haub Law's Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion since 2009. She is a health law specialist and a widely published scholar, and many of you have taken her classes in either health law or her favorite course to teach, contracts. Barbara is a graduate of Columbia Law School, where she was Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar and an editor of the Columbia Journal of Law and Social Problems. She began her law career clerking for Judge Nathaniel R. Jones for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. She subsequently joined the law firm of Arnold and Porter in Washington, D.C., where she practiced in the areas of communications and civil rights. Professor Atwell has served on the board of directors of Practicing Attorneys for Law Students, and she is currently a board member of the NIAC Housing Authority and the Share Hope Foundation. Our two speakers today, that's enough of me. Now let's let them begin the conversation.
I think I did turn it on.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Great.
thank you. Well, thank you for coming, Marcia.
Okay, I'm going to embarrass you. We didn't know that I was going to do this, but the moment you called, I can't say no to you because, and this is in terms of what it means to have a continuation. When I was a first year, Barbara was one of the leaders of mentorship for Balsa. And she was my mentor. So in terms of talking about belonging, these are these moments when you remember that, talking about 1981, those first semesters. But yeah, so whatever you will ask me, now you know, I will always say yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this. And we'll do a little mutual embarrassment because I'm not 100% sure about this, but I am one of those people. I don't really have any artistic ability. I don't do theater or anything like that. But at Columbia, we used to do this.
The law school shows.
The law school show. And my third year, I participated in, I think it was called a lawyer's line.
Yes.
Based on a chorus line. And did you choreograph?
I choreographed and danced. Yeah. When I could still move before the knee surgeries.
So that was my, one, like being up on the stage kind of thing. And so I just remember working with you and how much fun we had.
A lot of fun.
So, all right. So let's turn to our conversation. And before we get into the topic of belonging and centuries of struggle, I just wanted to see if you would share a little bit about your journey you grew up in Cincinnati, from Cincinnati to New York, and from dancing to the law.
Okay. So yeah, I'm from the Midwest originally, Cincinnati, Ohio, which is also an area which is also very rich in culture and opportunities. I am also the product of two amazing parents who no longer with us, but my mother was very much involved in culture and arts. And I do wish she was still alive, I could ask her why, other than I think she had two very rambunctious kids and thought I need them to burn off some energy. So she put me in ballet and my brother was in music. And I liked it. And I was in ballet at 4. So this is 1964. I was the only person of color in my ballet class, in my ballet school for a number of years. And I wasn't sure, but my mother was always encouraging whether or not this was even possible, because all that I could see, quite honestly, were white ballerinas or white male dancers. New York City Ballet, even the ballet company in my hometown, Cincinnati Ballet, all of the dancers were white. And then in 1969, Dance Theater of Harlem is founded by Arthur Mitchell, following the death of and the assassination of Martin Luther King. But he and Cicely Tyson decided to start this company. But their very first tour as a fledgling company, they come by Cincinnati. So at 9 years old, I got to see a full ballet company of Black people on a stage dancing on point, doing the things that I was dreaming about. Because of that time, someone would look at a Black dancer and say, oh, you should go into modern. There is nothing wrong with modern, but that was not what I wanted. I like, believe it or not, I like the point shoes. I'm paying for it now as I come to this age in life, but point shoes and the theater creating that was what I wanted to do. And thankfully, I had some talent. And thankfully also David McLean, who was the head of the dance company in Cincinnati, in bringing Dance Theater of Harlem and bringing a Black ballet company to the city, it let me know that this dream I had just might actually come to fruition. And so then I just started going to I was invited to DTH's very first summer program in Harlem on Morningside. Now we know this area well, on Morningside Avenue at a place called the Church of the Master. Sadly, that church does not exist, but it was in the basement. And I was the youngest in that program. So I'm 10, the closest person to me was 17. And it was that I knew that I had some talent. And so kept, Cincinnati Ballet took me in. I joined that company. Arthur Mitchell, I kept coming for summers in New York for the intensive program. I also won a Ford Foundation scholarship to go to School of American Ballet, which is the main training school for New York City Ballet. And the year that I was there was the year that the first Black ballerina was invited to join City Ballet. Her name was Debbie Austin. Mm-hmm. Now, the story is that Debbie Austin was invited to join, but Balanchine, the founder of City Ballet, said, who's the girl with the tan? And they had to explain the tan was permanent.
Oh my God.
And then here I am in the summer program. Again, only Black person there. And as my mother would say, well, you'll be noticed. This is her way of responding to things. She goes, you all look kind of the same, long legs and bun heads, and you'll be noticed. And I was, and they liked me. But when this program was ending, the head of the school said, I don't think that Balanchine's going to take you into the company. You're very good. Your teachers like you. But your nose is too big and you probably have to have part of your rear end surgically removed. And I was like, of course I went to my mother, who looked at me like, yeah, that's just not going to happen. So I joined Dance Theater and joined that company and toured and had a wonderful, wonderful time. And then one of the choreographers for DTH, a man named Louis Johnson, was choreographing the film The Wiz, and the film with Diana Ross and Michael Jackson. And a big chunk of our company did that. And so we weren't touring. I had applied to college because the school I was attending, Professional Children's School, always encouraged people to apply, even if you're going to defer. And Barnard was the place that she said they love dancers. So I did that. And I'm glad I did. I mean, I took some time off, but when I started Barnard, I fell in love. And even when the company was going to go on a tour, it was that moment we were going to take a tour to Australia where I would have had to defer. And I'd say college won out, probably to my mother's delight. She's a Southern Black woman who went to college herself, and the idea that she would not raise a child to go to college was probably more than she could handle, even though extremely supportive. And I am fortunate in life to have had the opportunity to actually perform and do what I loved. But yeah, I jumped right into college, and
And then you went straight from there to.
I went
Cool.
straight from college to law school, which in those days was probably more the norm than it is now. People take some time off, but I also knew I wasn't going into medicine. I can't take blood. So this, and no one in my family had been performers. So the idea of entering into even the theater and the arts was something different. As much as my family loved and appreciated art and culture, there's always because how will you make a living? How will you support yourself? Why my mother got me a typewriter so I'd know how to type in case I need jobs for, what it means to be an artist. But that's how I wound up in law school.
Okay, well, that's a great story. And so then so you go to law school, and then can you tell us a little bit about your legal career? Because it's a bit unusual, and sort of not only what jobs you've had, but sort of how you landed these jobs, because you've had some great jobs.
Yeah, it's so I do have to go back to my father ran a settlement house in Cincinnati. It was called Seven Hills. So he's he's social worker by training, but since Seven Hills is one of the largest, and I don't know if the term settlement house, now they would probably call it social service development organizations. So this idea of service and community in my family's blood. I think thinking about what you could do in terms of the civil rights movement and the people that were also some of my heroes, in addition to dancers like Constance Baker Motley. I thought if I wasn't dancing, this is what I would try to do. Although in law school, that even though there are these amazing civil rights leaders, but the approach to law school teaching of the time when we went, we were just beginning to have clinics. And so I was in that first clinic of Jane Spennick's for child advocacy, which completely opened up the world for what I thought I could do, which is and the child advocacy clinic represented young children who either had been placed in foster care or had been experienced either abuse and neglect within their homes. And we represented them along with support with legal aid, the legal aid's Child Advocacy Bureau. And that sort of got me to thinking about not necessarily thinking that I'd go to a firm, although that sometimes felt like that was the direction you were supposed to go into.
That was sort of the culture at Columbia. Yeah.
Yeah. And the quote unquote easy route of that time. I mean, we didn't have, a public interest law organization or social justice group. All those things have happened, I'd say, more recently, but we had a small but mighty group of public interest minded people. And then a friend of mine got into Manhattan DA's office. This is a guy named Steve Rabinowitz and Fred Watts. And I went to visit. It's like, oh yeah, I could do this. And partly was the trial, and I think you could see a thread. The performer in me could see myself in front of a jury and doing that kind of work. And so that's what led to, the first job was working, and going to Brooklyn was really critical because they had a specific office that only tried rape and child abuse, sexual assault cases, domestic violence. They've broken it up a little bit now, but if you went to Manhattan, Linda Furstein then, who started that, you might work and do one or two of those cases, but you weren't in a trial bureau trying other kinds of cases, either robbery, homicides, assaults. And after my experience with the Child Advocacy Clinic, I really wanted to just do that. And so that was, I will say, I think probably the trajectory of my career would have been a lot different if I hadn't had to make one other decision, which I think a lot of people do. I needed to make more money than the DA's office was going to pay me. My mother was ill and did not have the kind of health insurance she needed. And I was the person, even though my brother able, but he was an artist and creative, and he was not going to be able to get the kind of job that was needed. So I did go searching for a law firm job.
Mhm.
And because of the network at Columbia and different friends that I had, because the search firm wasn't going to take someone who'd been in the DA's office and never worked in a firm. So I will pause for 1 second and say, my second year summer, I worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And for what was then called now Legal Defense Fund, it's now called Legal Momentum. I had only worked in public interest legal organizations. So coming and saying to a firm, hire me when I had no firm experience probably was a little ambitious, but because also a friend who was well respected in the firm helped to put my resume forward, that's what led to
Okay,
the litigation job at Chadbourne.
okay, okay. And then you went back to Columbia and
Yeah, sometimes when you need money, that's one thing. And then sadly, my mother's illness was more challenging, and life in a law firm, I don't think it's changed much. Is really all consuming, rather intense. Although I've heard, at least from when I was at Harvard, when I said to students, to make my bonus, I had to do 2,000 hours. Some of them fell out. They were like, how could you do that? So that's like too much. But that was the standard. If you wanted your bonus, and I wanted my bonus, I was only there honestly to make money. 2,000 hours is what you had to do. And that's billables. That's not all the other hours, that I was also there. Sadly, that didn't allow me time to do some of the things for care for my mother and support. And little did I know, so a man named Lance Liebman was leaving Harvard to become the dean of Columbia Law School, and they were searching for a dean of students. And as you know, when we were in law school, there was no dean of students. Columbia did not have one. It was not among the schools that had a dean of students until I became the dean of students in the 90s. So the ideas about planning and belonging was sort of left to student orgs and left to student senate. But so Lance, I thought I was actually being invited to just talk about or to complain about all the things I thought Columbia could do better. And sometimes when you do that, I think Lance thought, oh, wow, this is the person I should put in charge of this. Because let's see, for all the complaining she did, if she can have any results or make a change. And so the next thing I knew, I was in a search for the dean of students.
right.
That's how that happened.
That's great. I mean, it's, as the dean mentioned, I've been here since 1986. So the idea of looking for a job is something that's pretty foreign to me. So, but anyway, so then I guess Harvard was a continuation, and just in terms of academia.
It was a kind of going back. So I, between that, so left Columbia because I met David Stern. He was a graduation speaker in 96. Didn't know he was looking for an HR person for the MBA. I wound up getting that job, went to Reuters, wound up leaving Reuters because sometimes like how things happen. I had a challenging pregnancy and wound up on bed rest and, having to stop, since I decided to have a child later in life. Thank God it was possible. But, and then wound up back at Columbia, partly because of David Stern was the chair of the board. So I have to say, I've been blessed to not have to always look for jobs. Some have come to me. And then even the Columbia job, John Manning, who is now the dean of Harvard Law School, was deputy dean at Harvard when the woman who had been their dean of students had left to go to Yale. And he said, I remember you when you were dean of students in the 90s. And he was just starting his teaching career at Columbia. And he said, I don't know if you'd ever leave New York, but if you might consider, we'd love to talk to you. I was honestly not going to do it, but a friend said, you've got to, it's Harvard. You gotta go. And I was like, you do know that Columbia is also an Ivy League school. So for me, it was like, it was nice And as you and I were talking earlier, I really am in many ways a New Yorker, but I did it and I went for the interview and I have to say, I fell in love with Martha Minow, who was then the dean of the law school. I don't know if you've read her work or had the opportunity, I highly recommend it, but just fell in love with her and thought I'd like to work with her. And since I also knew John, was a sense that he might become, if Martha stepped down, he might become the dean, which did work out. So yeah, I went to Cambridge, Massachusetts to work.
And I see how this happens because, even though we were a year apart at Columbia, we haven't really seen each other that much over the years, but sometimes we run into each other at academic conferences, and we ran into each other at a wedding. And you're just one of those people where you're like, oh, there's Marcia, this is great. And it's always wonderful to see you. So I can totally relate to how, these various opportunities came your way. So, all right, so turning to the topic of your talk and the idea of belonging. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about just terminology for a second. So when I was appointed Director of Diversity, first I was Director of Diversity Initiatives, and then it was, I think, Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and then it was Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So one of the ways that that someone explained the difference, among these terms is that basically there was an analogy to having a party. So if you are having a party, you can say, I want a diverse group to be there, right? So you invite a diverse group of people, and that's diversity. Inclusion might be saying, I want all of the diverse attendees to feel included, so we're going to make sure we ask those attendees to dance. And then equity would be including your diverse invitees to actually help plan the party. So, what kind of music are you going to have? What kind of food are you going to have, and things like that. And so now we're adding on to the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, this idea of belonging. So I just wanted to ask you, what does belonging mean to you? How do you kind of see that fitting into the whole thing?
Yeah, and the person who said that is a woman, Brene Myers, helped to develop that. She's now was a year behind me at Barnard, but she's helped to develop that sense of understanding in her work. She now is the chief diversity officer for Netflix. And we've talked a lot about that. One of the things, though, I think belonging has always been there. It's why when you were asking about a title, I think about it in terms of years of struggle. We just didn't claim that. We just didn't say that that's language was about how do we bring people in and include them and really make them feel like they are indeed belong here, because it is the challenge and struggle, and that really is the crux of it. Even the inclusion, the equity, the fairness of it. Diversity was like, I think, when the early days of, quote, what was an affirmative action, the idea that it created diverse spaces, some of it coming out of the language too, as we know, of Brown versus Board, of how do you really think about really creating equitable spaces and the reality of it, and not just, superficial language. Oh, you have a building and you have a space, but you don't even have the books, and you don't even have buildings that, really are a space for creating true educational experience. I mean, those are the difference, but the belonging part is what we have been struggling for. And I think also working at a law school has made me think about this even more. But when you look at the Dred Scott case, and Tani saying African Americans, or it wasn't saying African Americans of that time, but would never be citizens. That's the centuries of struggle. I mean, from going all the way back to when we arrived, it's like, are we indeed citizens? And now if we also include Indigenous people First Nation. It's like, do you have the rights to be here? The answer is yes, we do. But how do we actually create, as a community, true space and acceptance? And that's honestly the struggle. But that's why I think we have finally come to a point where we acknowledge this language about belonging, because all three of those things absolutely underlie that. But the whole thing is like, this is mine. This, I do belong here. In that same way I was talking about, thinking about ballet, is this mine? Could this be my space? And then when you see people who look like you right there, you're like, yeah, it can be mine.
And so how do you try to achieve that sense of belonging in your current role at the Metropolitan Opera?
So one, I'll go back again. I am, and this is probably where so many things for me also begin. You know, my mother loved music. She learned classical piano. She's a generation of, you know, where my grandmother, you know, put all of her money together and got her a piano, but you learned piano from the music teacher who was teaching the choir and in the church. But she also had the opportunity to travel, and so I think saw more things in the world of culture beyond maybe choral music. But she introduced me to music from operas. We had the albums of Leontine Price singing not just Porgy and Bess, but singing some of the big, great operas. I mean, so I grew up with that from my mother, and my mother in 1960 had a subscription to the Cincinnati Symphony, which is one of the big major symphonies in the country, in the world. And she would take my brother and I, even when we were younger. And she said, people may stare, they may watch, but these are our seats. We paid for them. Nobody. So this is, and so I grew up with a sense of like, this is mine from the beginning, even though I know my mother knew that it was a struggle, and that there were people who probably going to try to challenge that. But she's like, you paid for the ticket. So it's like nobody gave it to us. Nobody, you know, it's nice if they invite you as a guest, but she's like, this is your ticket.
So you've never struggled like with imposter syndrome?
Oh, no. Okay, that's a whole separate thing. That's a whole separate thing. But in the sense of having that foundation that this is mine. So that's how I come to the opera. Having, you know, been a dancer, been on the stages, Dance Theater of Harlem, performed at what is now Geffen Hall, but was Avery Fisher. Dance Theater of Harlem actually had a season in 1985. I wasn't in the company then, but I was part of the last performance. They invited all former dancers to come back. This is when Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan was the president. They were the sponsors for the honorary, she was the honorary chair of the event. It's a great, I've got a great poster of DTH at the Met performing for a season. So I know what's possible. I also know the history and artistry of people who were at the Met. So one of the first performers to have a full contract was a ballerina. Jacqueline Collins was a ballerina with what was the Met Opera Ballet. And then 2 years later, Marian Anderson is a singer. So I know that this history is there. It's a shame we still have to have this conversation since that history was there. So it's really about how do we use that history to infuse the work going forward. I also am lucky to have joined at the time where the company, the general managers, the board members all went through the same kinds of moments of revelation that corporations and businesses and academia also went through after the killing of George Floyd and other Black and brown people. So it's why Fire, Shut Up and Bones. It's a shame that it took 138 years for an opera composed by a Black person is on that stage, but that's the moment that I get to enter. So I see that as that opportunity.
And I've been thinking about belonging, particularly this week with the start of Ramadan. And, we have students, Muslim students who are going to be fasting during the day and who need special accommodations. And even when it's not Ramadan, they need prayer space and things like that. And I'm just curious, in order to sort of make sure everyone feels like they belong, do you see more efforts being made, in the working world to accommodate, whether it's Muslim students or other groups that might need special, just have special needs that others don't?
The answer is yes, and it's interesting, you'd think that the arts might be the first to do some of this. We've come along somewhat, I wouldn't say kicking and screaming, but we've come along slower than I think people would have anticipated, both in terms of the stories, although when you look at a place like the Public Theater, which was doing diverse casting of Shakespeare and other plays before anybody else, before Hamilton even comes along. But we weren't always consistently doing it with the people who work behind to create the work. So in the development office, in the even the people who select the stories and do that work. And the Met definitely was a place that was stuck trying to figure out how we do that. Even around religion, because of the performance schedule and what, things happening at night or being able to set up special performances or how you get performers. It takes a while. I mean, the Met Opera plans at least 4 years in advance.
Oh, wow.
Although we're beginning to learn to be more nimble, because Fire Shop in My Bones actually wasn't supposed to appear until the coming 23-24 season, but it wound up opening when we opened, returning from COVID. And we're recognizing there are ways for us to do that, but even like for our newsletter, we talked about Ramadan, and now we've gotten notes from people who are like, oh, wow, we weren't sure that people at the Met were aware of because we don't always even talk about, let's say, even religion, but I think acknowledging both religion, access, the challenges of, of what it takes for performers. We've now got performers who, some because of COVID, have experienced some challenges. So it may mean that they may need some additional time in terms of the work that they do for operas. Even 21-22 season was the year of covers, as we called it at the Met, because of COVID. Lots of people who might not have had an opportunity, and covers is another word for the person who's the understudy. They might not have had the opportunity to perform if a performer had not gotten COVID. But we also recognize that you need to have that kind of backup and support. So those kinds of things that we've begun to put in place, both in terms of access, how we think about the planning for opera, that's the work that we continue to do.
All right, and I have to, I know Renee's sitting there with my time being up, but I just wanted to ask you, how do you think we can improve going forward? Because we're living in this sort of political moment when, there's so much talk about, oh, we need to do things differently and we need to maybe not be woke or, things like that. And so, like, are you hopeful? Like, where are we now?
I'm sad that the idea, I think woke as a term is absolutely fine. But the reality of it, there have been people who've been aware and conscious and engaged in this work for that's why I say centuries, long time. It is, the difference has been, I think, generationally, and I think that's fair. People, of a younger generation saying, I don't want to keep waiting anymore. I want these things to happen. The challenge is, I think, political moment, because we've had culture wars before. There have been people making these statements that, again, that's why I say it is the challenge and the struggle. where people challenge a moment of certain people, whether or not you belong or not. I think we always are going to have to keep pushing back. I don't know that it's just going to be that people, quote unquote, wake up one day and say, yes, I believe. And then when it's also the part that I find just distasteful is it's more about a political act than it is about, do you care about the humanity of other people? Let's just be clear. We're talking about the humanity of other people. That, for me, does give me hope that people will see that. And for what I'm doing now, no, we're not curing major diseases, but what art can do is to raise issues and engage people in discussions that sometimes are challenging and that they don't want to consider. But sometimes in the music, in the moment, in the story, brings out particular ideas. Somebody had raised to me that they had just seen Dialogue of the Carmelites, which is an amazing opera. It's one of my favorite. It's essentially about a time in the 1700s where essentially Catholicism was under attack, but these nuns decide to hold firm and stand literally. It's a true story, literally giving their life. And the opera absolutely ends with each of the nuns going to the guillotine. But it makes you think about those ideas of what, one, you're willing to give up, two, what are the things that you would fight for? How would you do that? I think that that's what's needed more in some of these conversations to help people see that we're talking about people, we're talking about their engagement, we're talking about, again, their humanity. Why wouldn't you want to consider this person and their life in this moment?
I agree with you. And I think if we could just focus on the humanity part of it, that we would be so much further ahead, but we keep sort of trying to break everything down into these little bitty pieces, and it creates all kinds of tensions. But I will stop because I was told to, and and we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand.
Hello, thank you. So my question is about the terminology diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has come to prominence recently. I feel a little puzzled about the term equity. Could you spin out a little more what that means and why it's important?
Well, I would say the equity, so I don't know if you've ever seen there's a chart that we have done with discussions about this. One, it's people all on a chart, all with sort of different sizes and shapes and even abilities, getting a bike. And the bike looks exactly the same. Everybody's getting the same height bike, the same. So even if you were a person in a wheelchair, you're still getting this bike. That's what we think of as equality. We gave everybody a bike, but not everybody can use it. And the bike may not ever fit everyone. And then in the next slide, it shows people receiving bikes that match either their height. If you're a small kid, you get the one with the training wheels. If you're someone in a wheelchair who needs for accessibility, you have a different style bike that actually allows you to access it. That's what I think of as equity. This idea is that we really assess where people are and think about that in terms of the things and their needs, and not just quote unquote one size fits all. In some cases it might work, but if we're really talking about equity, yeah, I gave everybody a bike, but not everybody can really use it. If I'm really thinking equitably, I'm thinking about, even when you're talking about Ramadan, I'm thinking about what are the things that I also have to put in place to still allow, not necessarily changing the class structure or changing the time, but what are the things you might need to also offer if somebody is fasting in order for them to still be able to continue throughout the day. We just started, and it's still new, but for performers who have just given birth and are nursing, women who are nursing, some can use the lactation room, which is something the Met hadn't had before. Or if we arrange it and make sure that we also offer it to everyone, the opportunity, if you can, and not everybody can do that, because then I would say this is where issues around finance and what you can afford, but someone can bring, if you're a performer, your sitter might be able to bring your child and you could still nurse. But that takes work to set those kinds of parameters. And that's what I think about when I think of equity. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
Hi, my name is Evan. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Professor Atwell, for facilitating. We appreciate you having a conversation with us today. So this question is going to be from the academic perspective, specifically law review. So on one of our reviews, we have tackled DEIB in a couple different ways. So we have the first way is we have a separate application for students from diverse backgrounds with diverse experiences. We've done this largely based off of actually Harvard Law Review's application process. And it's just sort of like address the systemic racism in the law school to firm pipeline issue. And then the second way is that we have a new e-board position for a DEIB editor. And some of their main responsibilities include sort of like flagging new pieces that are proposed for publication, to read it and flag for any issues, and do social events. But what we would like to know is what more can we do specifically from our perspective?
It's interesting because I remember sitting, but it's like flashback, sitting with the law review. Guy named Michael Zuckerman was the editor-in-chief of Law Review. He's now actually one of the assistant general counsels for here in New Jersey. I do think, I mean, one of the things that they did, and this is also particularly unique to schools like that have also law reviews that also have an endowment. One of the things that they did was also to help support in terms of a fellowship, supporting a fellowship and scholarship in terms of work, but also around research and writing to help making sure that you're still growing and making people understand the opportunities in terms of writing and what you can get from being on a law review. I do think it's important to have someone who at least is focused in terms of the journal to actually have a conversation about what are the works and what are the things that are going into the journal. But I do think you still have to have the writing and the focus and having people focus on what are the stories that aren't being told. I mean, I think sometimes that's the challenging conversation when you're reading from, people who are submitting. What are the ones that I'm not getting? And how do you do that kind of outreach so that we're making sure we're really getting the full stories? Because, choosing to write for a law review, if you're, and it is still so much a part of, which I still find fascinating, so much a part of the legal tenure, the academia landscape of getting into law reviews. But I don't know that the reviews themselves are asking those questions. And I will say, same conversations happening both at Harvard and Columbia and Berkeley and everywhere else. I think that's also a good question to start asking. What are the stories that we're not getting? Maybe there's some people you start reaching out to as opposed to just waiting for the submissions to come in. The dean.
So speaking of the stories that are not being told, can you tell us about how you have the conversation at the Met about the stories that aren't being told, and about and this is an issue that gets very hot in popular entertainment every few months. Who can and cannot play what roles, especially the sort of classic opera roles?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. So one of the things that I think, and it's been the combination of who tells the story. Fire Ship in My Bones is a very distinct moment for the Met because it is the book on which it was originally written by a Black man, this is Charles Blow's book, his memoir that Terrence Blanchard, amazing composer, decides to tell and Casey Lemon, who is was the director also of the movie that just came out, I Wanna Dance. But Casey's been a long time script writer, but writes her this libretto. All people who come from an experience as Black people, and thinking about what that story, how do you tell that story? As opposed to the one opera that many people often knew, and that the Met has still done, Porgy and Bess. It is a opera that was written by Gershwin. Beautiful music, love it. Everybody loves that music, but it was telling a story that neither Gershwin nor the DeBose family knew well. The DeBose are the two writers of the original novel on which Porgy and Bess is based. And white, although from the Charleston area, and yes, they probably knew the people, but not of the community. And many people thought this is not really reflective. But the one thing that Gershwin didn't know was that if left to their devices, that opera companies would choose to put white people in blackface if he did not put in his, as an edict in his will and for his estate of this opera, that only Black people could do it. Now, that is one of the few operas where that is, but that's also, I think, of a time and a place. But now, because so many of the stories, I mean, many of the stories are fantasies. The whole ring cycle is, based on myth and ideas. And yes, maybe taken from Norse legends, but still, they are fantasies. Anyone who could sing those roles should be able to sing those roles. And that is the Met's view. And that is what we're doing more and more, and have started before I came on board. For many years, when you think of Leontine, and for those of you, if you have not ever heard Leontine Price, honestly, the voice of opera of the 20th century, please go get an album. Hear her sing Cleopatra, hear her sing Lucia de Lammermoor, hear her sing Mimi in La Boheme, the original Rent. This honestly is one of the most compelling singers, and it was her voice that made possible after Marian Anderson, because when Marian Anderson gets the opportunity to work at the Met, she's pretty much towards the end of her singing career and not at the full power. But when Leontine Price from Laurel, Mississippi is discovered by Bing, she literally quite changes the face of what opera and what people think of the voice. Before they thought, maybe it's only Sutherland. So there is, and we are doing this. I mean, this I do track. How many singers of color are in lead roles? Well, last year, every single opera that we did, even if you took out Fire Shop in My Bones and Porgy and Bess, had singers of color in lead roles, along with our chorus, which one of the great choruses of the world for many years did not have a diverse group, partly because of the auditions for Porgy and Bess. When the Met was doing the 2019-20 season, they heard more singers because people showed up. I asked different singers, why didn't you audition before? I didn't think I'd ever get a job. Well, when they auditioned for Porgy, yes, I felt like I was going to get a job. But because the Met heard them, then it opened up opportunities for singing in the chorus, in some of our larger roles, for being hired as quote unquote a regular chorus, which in the world of classical music is a huge opportunity. So we are doing that work, but also developing, we have a paid internship program, which we did not have before. I mean, it used to be you knew somebody and you were a friend or family and you could afford to work for free or for credit. Bank of America helped to support, along with two major managing directors that we have brought in. We had our first summer program last year with 15 young people, where 80% people of color, which was a surprise for the Met, and we have continued that, and we will have another internship program this summer. But we're also looking at backstage, probably one of the bigger challenges, a whole generation of people of what we called the Friends and Family Plan of the International Stage Workers Union. It was often just the brothers, the sons, the uncles got the jobs. Mostly all white, but participating in developing this art form. That has begun to change. We are doing actual workforce development outreach to think about how can you get, and these are great jobs that don't require a college degree. They do require strength. There are skills in terms of construction and engineering, but you could have a great job with benefits, well-paying, without having to, go to college, which for some people is really an opportunity. And those were just completely closed out because nobody even knew that there were openings. So those are the things that we're doing to putting it out there. Like, yes, these are great jobs. And yes, again, the willingness is there, but I think part of it is that we have to keep pushing and saying, here's the kinds of things that you can have an opportunity to do. Not just sing, great, or dance, but or become a person who runs the development, raises the money. Before it was only, you could only have a person who's white and knows rich donors. Operas and ballet and classical music, we have to change because a generation of people who used to do this are aging out. And so where will our next generation of people who want to come and share in this work or even develop this work, where will they come from if we don't reach out?
Last question. And to add on to that, my question is, what is something that you wish you would have known or something that you've learned throughout your career that you think would be helpful for law students that are soon to become lawyers? And what is something that you wish you would have known or have learned that can help us in our fight as the next generation to continue to strive to have equity, justice, and diversity within this field and just life in general?
Oh, so you said you started the question like, did I have imposter syndrome? I don't think that I always called it that, but it is that, there've been studies. We were just talking about Valerie Purdy Greenaway and a guy named Garrett Cohen, both out of Stanford, have done a whole thing on belonging and this whole thing. And it's a kind of continuation of Claude Steele's work around stereotype that I wish I had realized that everybody feels this way. Black, white, we're all entering these spaces, sometimes not feeling like we are the chosen. I do think as a person of color, because of the struggles and the outright stoppage of whether or not, my people, all of us could have access to things, we feel it a little bit more deeply, or even as women who were excluded from the opportunities. But I think we all experience this idea of not being the star or really being capable. Because when I went to a law firm, having never been to a firm, and everybody goes, this is the pinnacle, and if you go to a firm, you're going to meet the brightest and smartest, blah, blah, blah. I felt like I met some really bright, smart people when I was in the DA's office, and I did. And when I went to the firm, I had to realize these are the people I went to law school with. So, I know what some of their challenges. If I had thought about that before, I sometimes would let myself not do something and realize that some of the same people that or went to high school with, they're moving up in the world. If you thought this person, and maybe they get a little bit better and they're, or there's a person who's really smart and open, and then they move to, but you remember them when they were younger. If I held on to that and not let myself think like, oh, these are those smart people, we all have the skills and the talents to do different things. We also have to believe in that for what is our unique place, but we all have the right, and I absolutely feel like all have the responsibility to find that thing that we do really, really well and go out there and do that.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a good place to end. We're giving us all the sense of confidence.